All right. Eyes are the windows of the soul. This was by Thomas Fayer. Although rather poetic, such a statement becomes clearly more relevant if we acknowledge that dynamic changes in pupillary dimensions convey a great amount of information regarding the general psychological and neurophysiological condition of the observed person. A very good afternoon to one and all. My name is Vijay Leena Durai, and I am here to talk about pupil and technology. Just to give the crux of this particular presentation, I would be very quickly briefing about pupils, slowly going down to the technology that has been entangled with the pupil and its quantification, and how are these automation or machine going to help us. And I would then end my talk by centralizing the pupil plus device. So that's the overview of my presentation today. Pupils. Pupils provide a very critical information about our visual system. Adding to that, it's one of the medium in the eye which provides a great vital diagnostic information, also allows objective evaluation of the visual functions as opposed to, say, visual fields or visual acuity. It's a very, very sensitive indicator of pathologies that's involving optic nerve and brain stem dysfunction as well. Now, very common and a familiar picture over here is the pathway of the pupil, the pupillary pathway. There are two important pathways, parasympathetic and sympathetic, that everybody knows. Parasympathetic innervation causes pupillary miosis and sympathetic innervation causes mydriasis. One need to understand the pathway very carefully as they are important for the diagnosis depending upon the condition that is there. So as we know that pupils are predominant feature that can be assessed. Now, how are we going to check these responses? As the patient comes to you, we first get the visual acuity, one of the visual function is being assessed, and further going on to the anterior segment and posterior segment evaluation. Now, how are we assessing pupils and how is it important and why is it important to assess? Remember one thing, pupils are critical, but on the other hand, they are arduous to evaluate. In general, we estimate this particular acronym and it might feel effortless, but each of these components has immense significance as a diagnosis. So we check the pupils whether they are equal, round, reacting to light and accommodation. This is the very common acronym that one uses in the clinic to estimate and assess the pupils. Coming back to the arduous situation that I was talking about before, now what's the reason for it being difficult to assess? Isn't pupillary assessment easy? Well, to start off with, the observer decision making itself makes it more arduous. Adding to that, the target parameters such as the standard light that one would use, size of the target that the observer uses, the room illuminance, etc. may hinder our decision making. And this is where we are and sometimes bound to double check or authenticate our decisions for the assessment of pupils. So as I said, pupillary evaluation is important for all the conditions. And remember, pupils are not the medium that has a problem, but it acts as an indicator for the underlying disease that we have. So apart from all these diseases, pupil evaluation is important as a diagnosis factor as well as to track the progress of any given disease. So pupils can be used as a parameter that can be tracked and to see whether the management is fine or not. Will the machine assist us in doing so? At what phase are we in right now will be the pivot of the rest of my talk. So before talking about the machines, we need to know what are the components that they have to fulfill. First is the quality of care, reduced time, and reduced cost. So if we see L.V. Prasad Eye Institute, we have this pyramid that explains what the institute is, starting from the center of excellence to the base of the pyramid, that is our vision guardians. So any instrument that comes out or any sort of a technology that promises to help us in diagnosis and for the patient care should actually be available and accessible from the top of the pyramid till the bottom of the pyramid. From vision guardians to the center of excellence should have the accessibility to such technologies. So any technology should fulfill all these aspects. Apart from being used by ophthalmologists, vision scientists, or the optometrists, these pupillometers or pupil evaluating devices can very well use and has a wider umbrella of usage starting from neurologists, emergency services, by general physicians in tracking the progress of injuries, and psychiatrists, vision scientists, etc. Pupillometers have been evolved significantly. Infrared pupillometry is generally classified as photographic, which does not use online information and require frame-by-frame measurement of the pupils. And the other hand is the photoelastic, which is a non-imaging technique. Unfortunately, till recently, these systems were considered a very cumbersome and expensive products that were used to assess the pupils. But having one objective of all these evolution is that to get a greater accurate evaluation of the pupil. The recent devices that have been evolved are RAPDX, eye kinetics, neuro-optics, which has different other models under them. So these are the different pupillometers that have been evolved in the recent past. So we know that there are many devices that are there in the market. Now I would slowly bring in about the Pupil Plus device and the advantages of Pupil Plus, just to reiterate the fact that any device that is there in order to measure the pupil size should have all these factors included. It has to be objective, accessible, portable, real-time integrated, and very well connected. So Pupil Plus is a device that stands superior to all the other devices in one particular aspect, that is grading of RAPD. We know all the other pupillometers that have been mentioned before do calculate the pupil size, but the more of a subjective bias is involved in grading pupillary abnormalities, especially the RAPD grading. So Pupil Plus stands superior because it grades the RAPD. So any device that is there out in the market, basically, as I said, the main objective is to measure the dynamic responses of the pupil. So in order to measure that, we have two cameras placed in front of the pupil, separated by a septum, and there are LED lights that produces the reaction of the pupil, and these cameras record the responses of the pupil individually. If you see over here in this video, I'm sorry. Okay, so this is this is a video that would show the response of the pupil. I would show in the subsequent slides. This is the back end portion of the Pupil Plus, where again, as I mentioned, there are two cameras that are placed, separated by the septum. There is no bleeding of light from one to the other, and there are white and IR LEDs that are placed. This is again a little more detail about the optics of the Pupil Plus device, where we use 1 second of illumination and off time is 5 seconds, and 2 cycles would measure the direct and consensual reflex of the pupil. And what I mean by 1 second on and 5 second off is basically to cover the resting stage of the pupil, to give it ample amount of time so that it comes back to its resting stage, and then again show the light and make it constrict. So this is how the Pupil Plus device would be used. Now, why I say Pupil Plus is superior and what way it is superior would be explained by the following slide. If you see over here, this is essentially a graph that represents the variability between 3 ophthalmologists in grading the RAPD. So primarily what we have done here is that we've recorded the videos, that is the direct and consensual reflex, the dynamic responses of the pupil from 30 subjects, all are different grades of RAPD, and 30 normal subjects. So what the clinician has to do is that they have to grade the RAPD by looking at those videos. So the correlation or the agreement from one clinician to the other were completely different. All the 3 clinicians did not agree upon the same for any grade of RAPD that was there. For no RAPD and grade 1 RAPD, though they were a little close to each other, but beyond grade 2, they were all variable. So again, this is a small example of what the pupil plus would be doing or going to correct. And this is a video. Yeah, so this is basically a video that would show how the dynamic responses of the pupil are recorded. The glint that you see over here is the fixation light that is there, and when the light is shown on one eye, there is direct and consensual reflex of the other eye. So the graph that is produced by the pupil plus would look like this, where the x-axis is the time and y-axis is the pupil diameter. When the light is on, there is a sharp constriction, and then the pupil slowly redilates, and then the constriction, and then the redilatation. Now, apart from pupillary diameter, as I said before, how different is the pupil plus, one would ask. This is the difference that is there between the pupil plus and other devices. We get the resting pupil diameter, latency and velocity of constriction and dilatation, the amplitude of constriction and latency of constriction. All of these variables become very crucial while assessing or grading the RAPD, and all these parameters cannot be measured accurately by having a clinician. So if we just go back, brush up a little literature regarding RAPD and the grading that were there before, the RAPD grading is not something that is new. It's been there since hundreds of years. So there are many methods in grading RAPD, starting from the pupil cycle time, swinging flashlight test, NDF test, and magnifier assisted. These are all the tests that have been mentioned in the past, but all these tests are bound to variability, and that's why technology would help us in getting an accurate assessment of these gradings. So the other devices that I had mentioned before, yes, they are very superior. They do measure the pupils. If you go by the acronym PERLA, yes, the equality of the pupils are measured, but monocularly, not binocularly. The shape of the pupil is measured partially again. And reaction to light is, of course, measured, but accommodation is not measured. And what do we want to know over here? The important feature that one has to know is that the RAPD index in the binocular dynamic responses becomes very important than the monocular response. So again, these are the literature that were there. Now one should focus on this graph where we see they have measured the RAPD grading and graded it according to the neutral density filter in the y-axis. Now, if we know that this particular grade of RAPD belongs to this particular neutral density filter, we can actually compare this along with the pupil plus device, the RAPD score that we get, and get a benchmark of these scores in order to know who belongs to which grade of RAPD. So just again, a very easy interpretation of RAPD using these devices. If the right eye has RAPD and the left eye is normal, when you show the light to the right eye, there wouldn't be any direct reflex and there wouldn't be any consensual reflex. Now, if you show the light on the normal eye, there would be a very brisk direct reflex and a very brisk consensual reflex. What becomes crucial over here to understand is the direct reflex of the affected eye and the direct reflex of the unaffected eye. So just a simple math over here, when you compare the left direct by right direct, you get a score, and that score wouldn't be the same for normals and people with RAPD. Now, if we get the score, for different grades of RAPD, now that data would be fed into the device, and the device would actually give the score, and we can grade the RAPD as per the score. Now, again, this is another video that of a patient with right eye RAPD showing, 1 minute, I'm just to, this was supposed to be a video. Yeah. So if you see over here, this subject had right eye RAPD. When the light was shown on the right eye, there is absolutely no reaction. And when the light was shown on the left eye, the pupils completely constrict. That's what you see as a graph over here. So here, when the light was shown, there was no reaction. And then the left eye, there was constriction, right eye, no reaction, and left eye constriction. And if you see the left eye RAPD over here again, Now, the left eye has RAPD, the right eye constricts sharply, but the left eye wouldn't constrict. So, this is how we get the videos and the dynamic responses, binocular dynamic responses from the Pupil Plus device. And from here, we start the grading. Now, gold standard, any machine needs a gold standard for comparison, but unfortunately, RAPD grading doesn't have any gold standard, though we have the grading according to the neutral density filter, but it is not considered to be a gold standard. So one should keep in mind that it's all about the data that we feed into the machine. However, we clinicians set up the algorithm, it all ends up with the data that we feed in. So the machine basically learns from the data and then interprets. So there are different clinical validation of Pupil Plus that is going on, clinical validation with the clinicians, and the second clinical validation with the neural density filter. This is where the Pupil Plus device is right now. So I would end my talk by reiterating the fact that machines are useless if we don't feed the data into them. So new studies are already investigating these fields, hence a new era of neuromonitoring has begun already, and it brings great changes in future perception of conditions not just involving eye, but anesthesia, sleep, coma, locked-in syndrome, and brain mapping, etc. So any technology that comes out to the market basically undergoes this rigorous loop that is there. This is basically the engineering loop, and this is called as the validation or the clinician loop. So the engineering loop starting from the ideation of the product to the engineering validation, and then goes to the research study, feedback from the clinician, iteration, and then clinical validation and manufacturing. Right now, the Pupil Plus is undergoing clinical validation. Soon it can be seen in the markets. Thank you.